Maureen Muldoon is an international speaker, writer, storyteller, and songbird who believes in the miraculous power of storytelling for healing and transformation. She is the founder and spiritual director for Speakeasy. She helps people tell their truth so they can expand their reach, leave their mark, and honor their lives. Learn more at maureenmuldoon.com. I now pass it to Maureen.
Hi there. Thanks, Sherry. And let's just begin by checking in with your heart and what there is for you today in your heart. You might feel enthusiasm, you might feel hope, you might feel fear or concern or worry, whatever that is, you can go ahead and put it in the chat. This is the beginning of your one-word story. This is the beginning of your transparency. This is the beginning of being able to be brave enough to share your heart. In the Irish culture, they say Asher Lamar Cree, and I'm probably butchering that, but it means the pulse of my heart. And here we often navigate tough and tender conversations that are close to our heart. We're called to remember ourselves and to know ourselves by heart. Mother Teresa tells us that when we have no peace, it's because we've forgotten that we belong to each other. And we belong to each other is a complex statement, yet when we hear these words, we belong to each other, it can settle our soul. It can settle our soul. So we belong to our lone wild soul. And from this place of sovereignty, we then begin to extend and we recognize that we belong to each other. And we can have this, not an exclusive, like not one without the other, but these two things they're inclusive, they're intertwined. We belong to our sense of place, our well-being, our local wells, and our wilderness. And it's said that when you share a story, when you share a song, if you don't honor where you were when you first heard that story or where you heard that first story from or that song from, that it renders the song or story powerless because it's been amputated from its roots and colonized. And I think that's a really interesting concept. To colonize something means to appropriate a place or a thing for one's own good without concern for the original source or people. And this is why I asked Jeannie to share that statement of acknowledgement in our service today, and something that we might consider to include moving forward. So we belong to the self and we belong to this place. Pat Benetar tells us also that we belong to each other. She says, we belong to the light, we belong to the thunder, we belong to the sound of our words we've both fallen under. Whatever we deny or embrace, for worse or for better, we belong together. So we belong together, which is wonderful, but we don't necessarily belong to each other. In fact, I would like to suggest a different vantage point. To belong to yourself, you belong to a place of origin, as Mary Magdalene belonged to Mary of Magdalene. Jesus was Jesus of Nazareth. In that way, we also honor our roots, but we don't necessarily belong to anything outside of ourselves. Though this can be sort of a tricky corner, because although we don't necessarily belong to anything except our source, everything belongs to us. If you think you belong to something here, you create an alternative God. But if you think everything belongs to you in equal measure, and for the duration that it lives beneath your nose, then you will be more alive and alert in your relationships, and you will have a deeper degree of holy communion with all that is. Jesus didn't belong to the world, but when he encountered anyone, they belonged to him. And he took responsibility for the care, for they belonged to him. He didn't belong to the laws of the land. And when the soldiers persecuted him, they belonged to him. Even when they persecuted him, he asked his source to forgive them, for they knew not what they did. And he cared for them. He didn't judge them. He didn't condemn them. He didn't resist them, because if he did, then he would belong to them. And he did not belong to them. He did not belong to the dream of fear. He belonged to the song of love. And he turned into that song of love anytime things started to get a little wonky or crazy. In the Bible, it says he goes into the desert 40 times alone to pray. And this is what helps him to stay in harmony with the song of love. Our theme today is to sing your way home. Belong to your wild, sovereign soul and let everything belong to you. And this will help to maintain a balance in our lives. In rocky times of divisions and discontent, we can get off balance, but singing can steady us and return us to ourselves. And every time you speak your truth, it's said that you liberate your ancestors who had to stay silent. So I think that's a beautiful reason to get impeccable with your word. I invite you to begin to even maybe create for yourself a soundtrack for your own life, for your soul, for your medicinal needs. So to go back to that Pat Benetar song of, we belong to the light and we belong to the thunder. What songs light you up? What songs activate your thunder? What songs beckon your tears and usher in your rain? If there was a playlist for your life, what songs would be on it? I ask you these questions on Sunday morning, and I hope they don't just stay on Sunday morning. It's hard sometimes to have a follow-up, but when I ask, when you put, what would be on your soundtrack, that you might take that into consideration and maybe share that with a friend in your own personal community and say to your friend this week, what would be the soundtrack of your life? So many weeks ago when I said, go meditate in the woods, or when I said to you, create a history and a map of your creative travels and journey in your life. I know that sometimes these invitations can sound wonderful, but if we don't have accountability, most invitations, no matter how exciting, will just get swept off with yesterday's crumbs. So in order to really step into the actionable, the embodiment of what these types of medicines can offer us, having somebody to be accountable to is what makes it alive. So between us, there is this ability to be accountable. Right now, Bruni and I have an accountability for something that we do every day. And every day we just send each other an emoji through text messaging. I have a couple other people that I text every day around gratitude. So it can a little accountability can go a long way. And this is why I wanted to invite you and support you in setting up, assisting you to set up a circle of your own friends. And that we're at Speakeasy, as we move into this new year, are calling Toast and Jam our new salons, where you can connect with other members of your family, your friends, your own community. They don't have to be Speakeasy members, but where you can pull a little of the elixirs that you get here into your conversations. And Bella Gordon and I are going to be sending out an email every month for the Toast and Jam salons, where we, share with you the story or the song of the month. And then you can see how that and what that stirs in your soul, and maybe invite people over to your house once a month to make some toast and to smear some jam, and then to make a toast, which is like to tell a story, and then to jam with the song. And even if your friends come over and nobody plays any instrument, you can supply a kazoo. Everybody can play the kazoo. So I share this with you because I know that there is great elixir in your own poetry and your stories. You get to cultivate that within yourself. So because we can't give what we don't have, I ask you to think about your music and what is strong music for you, what is strong medicine for you, and maybe to sit down this week and to put together a little couple songs of what makes you feel. Not necessarily what makes you feel good or what makes you feel bad, but just what makes you feel. Because weather, our internal weather, is to be honored, and it's not always orderly and it's not always proper. We humans rage and we get swept off and we go cloudy. And the thing is, there's no bad weather. There's no bad weather patterns. It's all just weather. But as you take the time to court and confess and care for the weather of your wild self and to confess it, you're better able to make space for and honor the wild weather patterns of another. And what a beautiful and generous thing to do. we come to find that we all carry lightning and we all carry thunder and we all carry rain at sometimes. And it's generous to make space for that weather in your sister's bones. And we don't always, we don't always do this. We don't always make space for one another's thunder. We want everyone to show up as light, especially in spiritual communities. We go, just bring your light, don't bring your thunder, or we attempt to fix it or change it or quiet it instead of just letting it be. What if thunder was just another song on the soundtrack of being human? There's also in each of us a blustery wind. You ever notice that? A blowhard, a bitterness that lives within all of us. If you see it in your brother or your politicians, then it belongs to us, or otherwise we wouldn't see it. But if you see it in your brother and you judge it in your brother, it's because we've buried it in our brother. So we could judge it or we could heal it. And we judge it when we say, that is not mine. And we heal it when we say, I am that. And we begin to take that blowhard, bitter, blustery, bag of winds of ourselves. And we care for it. And we include it in the soundtrack of our lives, allowing it and accepting it and bringing the self back into harmony with it is the way that we sing heaven back into existence. Sharing songs and sharing stories is a spiritual practice that keeps life alive. They contain powerful and ancestral medicine, and it can't necessarily be obtained from reading a book. Oral stories and songs require breath. They require presence. Breath is present tense. Therefore, it's very holy. Each breath is fresh baked. My telling you this story right now is that no matter how hard I try, I will never be able to repeat the story the way it's been told right now. So oral stories and oral songs are sacred. Some cultures do not store their stories in squiggly lines on the page. Some cultures never write anything down. Their myths and stories are all oral. And so every time they tell it, they give breath to resuscitating their stories and keeping them alive. And in many cultures, there's their creation story. We have many ourselves, Adam and Eve and the Big Bang. And these stories for us happened a long time ago, but in these indigenous cultures, what they view as their creation stories is that every time they tell the story, they're re-offering creation. They're re-extending this creation. They're actually offering creation another chapter in their creation story. I think that's magnificent. And I wouldn't mind adopting that into my own life, that I am the continuation of the creation story. So their lives are on this unending cycle of the season, of the story, of this continuation, of this retelling, not locked in books. The story's not read with the mind, but it's felt with the heart. Jesus and Buddha and Socrates are just a few of the great teachers who kept their stories and their teachings fresh baked, that they didn't write anything down. And there's a present power to those fresh baked teachings. Think of the stories and songs that informed your life, maybe from a mother who sat by your bedside, or an aunt or a brother who told you how to do something. I remember one time my sister told me the story about how to navigate being bullied in school. And I couldn't believe the story she was telling me, but it was a story that informed me and it helped me to navigate and transform a bully into a best friend. So maybe you have stories like that told by a bedside, or at a pivotal moment of your life, or around the campfire, that brings us into this timeless, liminal, beyond time space. This vortex when someone begins to sing to you, or someone begins to tell you a story, and you enter into something that some people call dream time. And you begin to travel in these stories over mountains into different time zones. Stories are like magic carpets in that they can take you beyond the beyond and then back again. It's kind of magical because it's a twist of time, in that it's both outside of time and also present, right? And that's kind of magical. So just the idea that we might want to capture our ideas into symbols. And listen, I'm a writer, so I capture ideas into symbols all the time. It's just interesting to contemplate not capturing all of this meaning into symbols. And I'm sharing that before we hit record. about certain preachers and teachers who just let it flow like a river and tune in and tap into, this beautiful flow, which I can do sometimes, but I haven't really stepped off into the tightrope of my own stories without a safety net of writing things down. So to be completely honest with you, but this is kind of points to the idea that we think in time, and that's maybe why Jesus and Buddha and Socrates never wrote anything down. This is what Socrates said to Plato when Plato began to write Socrates' teachings down. He said, "This discovery of yours, writing, it will create forgetfulness in the souls of the learners, because they will not use their memories. They will trust to the external writing characters and not remember of themselves. You give your disciples not truth, but only the semblance of truth. They will be hearers of many things and will have learned nothing. They will appear to be omniscient and will generally know nothing. They will be tiresome company, having the show of wisdom without reality." I'll just sit there for a second, right? I mean, many of us have libraries upon libraries of books, pointing towards the idea that we might know something, and yet we never ever really allow ourselves to trust our inner compass. I want to invite you to begin to trust your inner compass, to be your own library, to tap into your own source. Maybe it's time to stop regurgitating these ancient texts and gospels and get to know our truth. Knowing and remembering your story is just a part of the practice. That's just one half of the practice, is to know and remember your story. The other part of the practice is singing and speaking and sharing the stories. That's what completes the loop of holiness. And the space created by the communal sharing is the sweet sampling of our wildness and our wilderness. And when stories and songs are shared, it's transformative. It actually transforms sound into salve. We see this in the 12-step program. When we see the weather and the rain and the thunder and the lightning that moves across the terrain of our brother's face and our sister's faces as they share their stories, and our hearts break with their thunder. And we're drawn into the experience of this liminal time, this present moment, and we begin to make peace with, and we begin to accept in the other and forgive in the other what we have attempted to evict in ourselves. That's what storytelling can do. It shows us that other people can be brave for us. And if they can tread into that territory of demons and dragons and still come out alive, that we can begin to tell our truths. And then we come to peace with it. And as A Course in Miracles says, peace is the goal. Now, peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the decision that we don't need to fear the thunder, that we do not need to fear the thunder, that we do not need to make meaning of it. And as we stop making meaning of it, the storm passes. Have you noticed that? Jesus did not say hate your enemies, fear your enemies, capture, control, or criticize your enemies. He said love your enemies. And the Beatles have accredited the Blessed Mother for the wisdom that comes when we find ourselves in times of troubles. She whispered words of wisdom. Let it be. Just let it be. Let the weather be. Let the thunder be. Let the rain be. Today we're in what feels like for many a big classroom of decisions and divisions and othering and othering and othering and othering. And we must remember that we're not defined by the world. We belong to a source that is so benevolent and so present and so powerful. This is what Lady Gaga had to say. It's funny, I just thinking about the people I'm quoting today, Pat Benetar, Lady Gaga, and Mother Teresa. That's a lineup for you. Lady Gaga illustrated how fear works, and I posted it on our Facebook group because I thought it was such an interesting metaphor, comparing fear to a snake. And she says that first the snake has to break us into small pieces and separate us into small groups. And then fear gets us to hate each other in these separate spaces. And then fear, in the hatred of each other, we begin to shrink and become weaker. thus making us more digestible. And then fear consumes us all. Fear thrives when we feel divided and separated by labels and weakening by isolation, but we're not separate. We're not shattered pieces. We're one. And what happens to one of us happens to all of us. Every story, every identity we can find ourselves in. We are all transgender. We are all Puerto Rican. We are all migrants. We are all poor. We are all privileged. We are all oppressed. We are all oppressors. And when I say this belongs to me, when I say this belongs to me, I neutralize its power. Nothing can have power over me unless I believe that it is outside of me, and it's not. This is mine. This is mine. And in speaking that truth, I can heal it. The paradox is that everything belongs to me, but I do not belong to anything. And this is how John O'Donohue put it. John O'Donohue. He says, you should never fully belong to anything outside ourselves. I love that. You should never fully belong to anything outside ourselves. He challenges us to seek a belonging that begins inside, that roots us into who we truly are. How do we belong to ourselves? How do we nourish and connect with our own hearts so that we can offer ourselves more freely to the other? In moments of solitude and struggle and heartbreak, we often find our most essential self. Have you noticed that? But we don't want to invite in struggle and heartbreak to get to our most essential self. We'll come by that, honestly. Life just will have that come to us. No life is really unvisited by stress and heartbreak. When we are broken to be woken, we get to recognize that we get to be broken to be woken to the idea that we were never broken. So that's the one good thing about moving through those tough classrooms. So let those tough classrooms be, the stress and the heartbreak. Just let that be and come when it comes. But we can court and should court solitude to support our equilibrium and our qualities, and let the songs of our souls come from that silence, and the stories of our soul come from that solitude, so that it can be shared in community, so that we can be sure that it's ours and it's not regurgitated. There's value in taking ourselves off into the forests, into the solo adventures. There's value in the artist state, as Julie Cameron has shared with us. There's value in the meditation to build a certain resolve in our ownership. It helps us to tap into our brilliance. Practicing solitude is a reminder that we're whole and capable and valuable, even without the external validations. When we nurture this inner connection, we no longer are driven by the need for anyone else's approval or the need for anyone else to complete us. Instead, we meet each other, and we meet ourselves from a whole place, and we meet each other from a whole place. And this brings so much richness and so much fullness to our relationships, because we're not coming like vampires in need of anything. We're coming wholly from this holy state. And from this holy state, we can actually co-create without eclipsing ourselves. Like the flower of life, if you've seen this symbol, it's so beautiful. We're all connected. We're all holy. We're all interconnected from this holy place. And from this holy place of interconnected holiness, we can create miracles as surely as from this eclipsed place, from this entrapped place, from this entwined place of enabling, that we create disease, or we make up disease. So watch for that in your circles. Do you come to your circles from a holy place, or do you come from people pleasing or having somebody try and complete you? Attempt to belong to groups at the cost of yourself is going to cost you a great deal. You'll be in jeopardy of devaluing and diluting yourself, which is the most valuable thing you can bring. And this is why we must honor and delight in the weirdness of our being. this past week, somebody was talking about, weirdos. And I said, God bless the weirdos, man. Those are the ones who enable us to cut new paths into places we've never been before. And so bless your weirdness, let your freak flag fly. Your truthfulness and your transparency are such gifts, you know. As a 12 steps program would say, your rigorous honesty. Bring me your rigorous honesty. Only then will your songs and stories flow like spring water with no agenda except for to be expressed. Now, here's again the paradox. The spring belongs to the land, but the water informs the land. The land does not inform the water. This is the truth about your stories. If the water wants to run a certain way and there's a mountain, the water will cut right through the mountain. It might take her some time, but she'll do it in the same way that she did it with the Grand Canyon. The Colorado River eroded the rocks over millions of years to form the canyons that we see today, making the water primary force behind its creation. And this is the power of your story and your songs. They're fresh water that can cut through most dense areas. This is how you get to be a hot knife through butter. Your water, your holy water, is like your breath. Your holy stories, your holy gospels are so powerful, especially if it springs from a holy well. So, like the water and the rock, there is a sense of belonging. In James Baldwin's words, he says, nothing is more unbearable once one has had it than freedom. Does that sound strange, that quote? Nothing is more unbearable than freedom. Why is that? You know, all of these truths set us free, but what he's writing is about is how we long to be anchored as well, to be moored to something or someone as a way to feeling both free and secure. And that's why the water needs the land. It gives it purpose. And that's why we need ears for our stories. And that's why we get to be the land for the stories of others, that we get to let their stories cut through us and inform us. And this is what moors us to each other. It tethers us to each other. But remember, being moored to something does not mean you are owned by it. You are only temporarily tethered. And this is the truth of all of our relationships. And this is what kind of kills us, because we don't like temporary. We want till death do us part. Well, that has never worked out for us humans. We're way too fickle for that. So we have to make peace with the temporary state of being, you know, the temporary tethering of time. And this is what makes it so exquisitely stunning, because we recognize the preciousness of it. We get to see the spectacular now. Because freedom and solitude are gorgeous. And yet without connection, they can feel purposeless and unsteady, and even, as Baldwin suggests, unbearable. So this vision of belonging isn't linear. It's a circle. We extend from ourselves and then we return to ourselves. And then from this center of self, we extend again and again without ever losing our bearings or our equilibrium. We're like the seasons and the cycles. We're like the breath that comes and returns and goes and returns. We belong to this continual cycle of returning to ourselves. Each of us in this weaving happens when we come together in this recognition. Is so vital. And we get to be in this great ongoing rhythm and reflection of life's deeper connections. Our sacred hearts, our inner hearth that kind of cooks up these ideas and these inspirations for us and for us alone. And then in community, we meet at the extended hearth where we give and receive in this communal fire where we come together and we share our stories and our lives. The hearth is a place of, you know, comfort, a reminder of the connection that we sustain together. We have this spark to add to the fire of our community, an ember of inspiration to add to the fire of our community. And when we bring our embers together, we create a light that sustains and guides us all. Sometimes you'll be very lit and your ember and fire will be bright and you'll be holding it up for others. And sometimes your embers will be weak. And that's a good time also, you know, to be in community, because sometimes you're giving and sometimes you're receiving. So I ask you today, what are the embers within you that are wanting to burn brighter? What dreams or stories are calling you? How do you tend to this inner fire so that it can burn brightly for yourself and bring warmth to others? Freedom isn't just about roaming unbound. It's about finding the relationships between us and supporting the dreams of others. So I'm going to close with this It's an Indian proverb that I think is kind of beautiful. It talks about the circles. It says, have you ever noticed that everything an Indian does is in a circle? And that is because the power of the world always works in circles, and everything tries to be round. In the old days, all our power came to us from the sacred hoop of the nation, and so long as the hoop was unbroken, the people flourished. The flowering tree was the living center of the hoop, and the circle of the four quarters nourished it. The east gave peace and light, the south gave warmth, the west gave rain, and the north, with its cold and mighty winds, gave strength and endurance. This knowledge comes to us from the outer world with our religion. Everything the power of the world does is done in a circle. The sky is round, and I have heard that the earth is round like a ball, and so are all the stars. The wind in its great power whirls in a circle, and birds make their nests in circles, for theirs is the same religion as ours. The sun comes forth and goes down again in a circle. The moon does the same, and both are round. Even the seasons form a great circle, and they're changing and always coming back again to where they were. The life of a man is a circle from childhood to childhood, and so it is in everything where power moves. Our teepees were round, like the nests of birds, and these were always set in a circle, the nation's hoop. A nest of many nests, where the Great Spirit meant for us to hatch our children. That's from Black Elk, Holy Man of the Sioux. So in closing, I hope you are inspired to create your own story and song circle so that we can better care for and belong to each other. And as we close out this year, we invite you to find your own stories and your own songs. And we intend to create these salons, Toast and Jam, for stories and song sharing, where you can meet up with others and weave your stories together and weave your lives together and hopefully sing your way home. And that's the word.
Wow, this was such a rich conversation. Talking about stories. One thing I wrote down that surprised me, Maureen, was I wrote down and highlighted, stories are songs without a beat. I had never really connected it. In all of history, stories and songs have always been together. And just like in every group, there was a cook traveling with the traveling troupe, there was always a storyteller and a minstrel. So we have, as people, as human beings, we've always been connected to story and the importance of story. But one thing you made me realize too while you were speaking was that everybody has a unique story. Nobody knows my story. I'm the only one who knows my story. So therefore, if I don't tell my story could go away with me if I never tell my story. And that's a really important thing. And I also made a note that I'm going to find 10 songs, take time to find 10 songs, to make a list of 10 songs that always come to mind when I want to hear music or I want to sing to myself in the car or whatever, so that I can examine those songs and know more about myself as to why those songs mean something to me.
Yes, I
Yeah.
love that, Sherry. I love that. And share your song, your playlist with all of us, so we can get to know you too and see what songs have sparked a struck of light in your heart. I love the idea that stories are songs without the beat. Here's the thing, we're always telling a story. It's just, are we telling the one that we want to be known by?
Oh, true.
Like the complaining stories, the comparison stories, the fearful stories. Like we're always telling stories. Our whole life is just a tapestry of stories. And I think that sometimes we don't really take responsibility for the stories that we want to give breath to. Because in regards to the indigenous cultures, like this is how you extend creation. I found that to be so beautiful. This is how you extend creation.
Yeah, you made another thing that I circled on my notes, that oral stories and songs require breath. And that is maybe why Audible has been so refreshing to everyone.
Yeah.
Because
But
when Audible showed up, everybody's like, "Oh, have you heard this wonderful thing, Audible?" Well, it was books that were always there, but having someone give breath to those stories, especially the author, him or herself, has touched something within people.
yeah,
So I'll remember that oral stories require breath. And
they
maybe that's why reading out loud is even better than reading to yourself. Yeah.
Oh my God, absolutely. Like I mean, when you think about it, like that is such a gift when we wake up in the morning together and everybody shares their voice and reads the story. It's like we get to hear it again. And sometimes I have had the experience where I've read A Course in Miracles and I thought I got it. And then somebody reads it again and I go, oh, wow. Depending on what they struck or what they paused. Sometimes hearing somebody else read something helps us to digest it. Sometimes a lot of people say to me when they're reading it, they can't get it. But it
Yeah.
is still a gift for them to be able to read it because somebody else is getting it.
Yeah. That's true.
you know yeah, when I wrote Spiritual Vixen's Guide to an Unapologetic Life, it was 5 years ago, and then I was invited to do an audible on it, and I hadn't actually read it since I wrote it. And when I sat down to read it, it was such a gift to myself to hear my voice read the story, because there's a thing about and I note this in a lot of the writing classes that I facilitate, is that when someone comes to the circle to share a story that they had once thought was going to kill them, when that's happening, in the midst of that story happening, you're just in survival mode. You're just trying to row one breath at a time, and you're just getting through it. And then when you honor it by telling it again from a solid ground, you give yourself this gift of reminding the trauma that's stuck in your body that it's okay. You've survived. And it's so healing. It's not just healing for your community, but it's really healing for you. If somebody's voice isn't ringing true for me, I can't listen to the book. I'm like, I'm sorry, goodbye. And so it's important. I think that's the kind of thing that you need to do on the internal. You have to make sure that your well is clear so that you can breathe, because it's not just intonation and pausing, but it's your spiritual imprint that is laid on the breath. And in the beginning they said God moved across the water. This is sound. This is when sound came in. And it's interesting because for so many years, decades, I lent my voice to other products and programs. Like I was on CSI, and I was playing this reporter, Linda Darby. It was a great set, great actors. It was very professional and lovely. But I was always playing this reporter who was always reporting on dead women. It was like, it's Linda Darby here, and we found like decapitated so and so, or this dismembered woman, or and I was just, every time I went to the set, I think, oh my God, I'm like just like I'm cog in this wheel of horror stories, and around the same time, I began to write a show for my mom called Booby Trap, the very breast show in town, which is about a woman's experience with a relationship with her breasts. And it was like too big, too small, breast cancer, first bras, second base, like all of the things that we experience with these the beautiful body parts and what they mean to us, and how sometimes they feel like ticking time bombs. And I remember watching women, I would get women on stage to tell their stories, these intimate, beautiful stories about their breasts. And I remember telling my own story. And I think it might have been around one of the first times that I was telling my own stories, except for when I was in 12 step, because I was always reading somebody's script or telling someone else's story. And when I got to tell my own story, I couldn't go back. I loved working as an actor. I loved being a cog in other people's wheels. I loved some of the work that I got to do, but my soul could not go back to reading these other scripts. I could only do my own my soul really wanted me just to read my own scripts, and that's what eventually led me to be a minister, was that it allowed me to find a spot in the world where I could tell my own stories, my gospels. And because Course in Miracles tells us we're all ministers of God, this is a necessary component for you as well. We want to be active in our spiritual practices. And one way to do that, like you're saying, Sherry, is to like listen for your music, to listen and honor your music. Maybe even to think about, I'm going to do 3 songs for my past, 3 songs for my present, and 3 songs for my future. And maybe the past songs are about the songs that you learned as a child. Like I learned, I'm a rambler, I'm a gambler. And boy, didn't that song come into fruition. I sure am a rambler and a gambler. How they might have informed you. You know what I mean? You look to see
Yeah.
how those songs might have informed you. Were your
Yeah.
songs of your youth all sad songs? Were they all celebratory songs or?
Yeah, you can categorize them. I've made my categories heartbreaking, happy, and consoling.
Ooh, I like that. Good. Yeah, make it your own.
Yeah, and you can make it your own. So we'll do that.